Hello. Choosing the tempo, articulation, phrasing, pacing, breathing, rhetoric, eloquence, interruption of silence, taking account of decay for long values and shaping the short values that follow it decoratively to bridge to the next long values. It's like vowels, consonants, syllables, words, stanzas, chapters, books, macro, micro, major, minor, or subtly in between, half major, half minor according to the top or bottom tetrachord. And then you have also the inevitable awareness of how music that you play was played when it was composed and performed centuries before us on instruments that didn't exist, like the modern piano for the keyboard. But beyond that, the hearing was not the same. The expectations of projecting the sounds wasn't the same. The fact of playing for audiences stacked up on lines and rows was foreign concept. Music was to worship in church. They don't watch it being played, you hear it while you meditate spiritually on the psalm of the day. Or you use music for the necessities of marching for soldiers, or dancing for rejoicing. So there is a specific action that music created for each occasion, was complementing it as a soundtrack of the celebrational event, mourning up to rejoicing in all the spectrum of human experiences. And well, little by little the lyrics went away from the pitches, and you had pitches without lyrics. But because of the patterns of expression of mourning with descending appoggiaturas, if not when they're tied they become suspensions, and appoggiaturas, leanings in Italian. You don't have to say amore, dolore, as the original Italian early operas like Monteverdi's were using the accentuation of the Italian language, since it was their cultures and their language. The music with the upbeat, downbeat, expression of tension release, concept of major and minor, that was in fact expression of dissonance and consonance, which was evolving from a generation to the next. What was dissonant became consonant because it was absorbed in the evolution of the musical language. But away from the text. Of course, you still have music that is sung, like motets in Renaissance. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. So you have gesturals, things of intervals that express emotion. If it's a sixth, because it's major or minor, or it expresses a mood, an expression of anxiety, hope, lyrically. So of course, you don't need the lyrics if you have a minor sixth to feel like it's mournful, like Bach. So some intervals become symbolic of gestures that were with lyrics but don't need the lyrics to express what they carry is a major hope, minor less. Of course, that's more subtle than that, but basically it is the intervals that are major or minor compared to the fifth or the fourth, which are perfect. Therefore, they don't carry a charge of expression for the major or the minor. Be it, this contrast becomes more meaningful in the 19th century, where the ballade by Chopin cannot be in major, because then it implements really a different expression of mood. But in Bach's music, if you hear, yes, you hear a difference of minor and major third, but it's less prevalent because the decorative patterns in the Baroque are part of the main patterns of the notes, which are the suggested long tones, either the bass line or the melodic line. And of course, the patterns of the decorative elements, arpeggiated or elemental, they're there to enhance the harmonic pace, since you need two beats on the same harmony, or Chopin 4, and again on the way down, and Bach is only, but it's a question of harmonic pacing. And of course the minor and the major, the appoggiatura, the suspension, give you a sense of dissonance resolution with anticipation before the cacciatura or the appoggiatura, compared to when you hold it over, then it becomes a suspension. With the decay on the non-sung or organ instruments that sustain the sound of vibrato with the instrument of strings, you have a decay of the sound, and you don't feel the tension at the moment where the note overlasts the harmonic change and becomes the dissonance. But it does not sound dissonant because it's softer at the point unless you can repeat it, which is unnatural to the piano, which is all about articulation, not so much about holding sound. So then the tempo choosing for an expression, let's say mournful, like this, on the piano of today can be very slow, regardless if it's right or wrong, and in the eyes of whom? Well, of the context of hearing and expecting. You hear the phrasing by two, which is sort of a sigh, which is why it's lament, and it's corresponding more to the Baroque bow of instruments. So you hear that by a imitation through the violin bow, let's say, of the human exhaling or sighing. So all these innuendos are symbolisms which carry through different tempi. So the length of the bow, or the capacity of the support of the lungs to sustain a slow tempo of a sung motet or instrumental with the bowed instruments, or the wind instrument, oboe or flute, being instruments that also sustain by the breath, you play when you inevitably exhale, but you practice to exhale the least early possible to bridge longer phrases, and then you breathe to connect the next phrase, or just take another sentence. Instead of run-on sentence, it becomes a sentence. And of course the organized sentences by still small groups of bricks, if you want, like Legos, they're very clear in Haydn, and you don't have to worry about, like Chopin, where you start, you sort of pause and then restart from the second degree to the dominant. So think you reached your arrival on the tonic, but immediately suspension goes on, the run-on sentence. So that's impossible in one breath. Is a singer or an oboist or a flutist, and it's not supposed to be. It's just that the ideal of the romantic 19th century era musically was to free oneself from the formal aspects and express one's own expression of feelings in an unadulterated by the formatting expression. And so the run-on sentences became the, like in writings like Proust, French writer of the end of the 19th century, early 20th, those sentences can last pages. So it's a literary function that brings you to stay on, as a reader, on a suspension expectation. One way or the other, the people who lived and created those artworks historically for us, but in their own time for them, theater, poetry, sculpture, painting, evocation of moods through music or with lyrics, specifics, opera, songs, dance, the necessity, the uplifting of the spirit that music brings, it wasn't just functional, but it was representing well the time period of their social evolution of a given geographical area at a given time. And then it becomes prone to construct music for itself, not as a reflection of other moods. Foods. I was food for thought in mind, but okay. For instance, a fugue, just like a crossword puzzle, it's a play of the mind. It can become emotionally intense when it's injected in the character of a mourning or of an excitement, if you play a fugue. But you still have equal parts in the idealization of society when it was at the time not at all well. Most of the places, even sometimes around today, were very vertical, with rulers from God down to humans to fear and to serve, and to slave. And the idea of the polyphony in another dimension of idealization of life was equal parts, equal voices, behaving well, not colliding unless you want to produce that which Beethoven does in his fugues aesthetically. Bach is the contrary, harmony in the sense of celestial harmony, or the harmony of the elements. Even in crowded five-voice fugues, all the voices behave well with each other, emotionally, with intensity or excitement, dissonance, consonance, but they don't accidentally enter in a fight. And I think that with evolution of societal situations of music, projection of instruments, acoustic rooms to be performed, the expectation of virtuosity of a Mozart playing a concerto in a Sunday afternoon gazebo in Vienna, or a Liszt playing virtuosic, fast and loud passages of his own, or Wagner's son-in-laws of his music he was promoting by making the piano demonstrations of it. The levels of virtuosity constantly evolve, a bit like the, I guess that would be a good analogy, the track and field 100 meters ran under 9 seconds for the present world record, fastest person on earth, but perhaps in the 1930s it was, I don't know, 20 seconds or 18 seconds, and people still thought it was amazing. It's only when you compare times and periods which didn't know each other or didn't know about each other, of course, not in the forward way, but in the backward way, they had little information compared to how much we have information of the past. In nothing but in music, what instruments they use, how they tuned them, how they breathed with the music, how they accompanied the music, what it meant to have this tradition compared to the Flemish language or the Italian or the Spanish or the French, and then how you organize the instrumental music according to the music of these countries and their language that you sang in or danced in. And so, yes, the universality with the instrument tuned on unisons, well tempered, or in fact, for the people from the Baroque must have been out of tune because they were into the perfect major thirds, which had to be squeezed to obtain the unison, but then it allows you universally to play in every key, hence the well tempered clavier. Then the tonalities on colors, synesthesia, so dear to Scriabin and Rimsky-Korsakov, but though they didn't agree on the colors of the tonalities, is that there is always a symbolism of translating an art into the words of another art. In other words, it's only what music is itself. You can also say, yes, it's imitational of sorrow, as I said earlier, or perhaps of joy, of excitement, of dance. But it is, while it is also what it is by itself. It's its own language. It doesn't need to be explained while played. It has to be played in order to be translated through the innuendos that the piano as an instrument of today brings of harpsichords or organs of the past. So it's a sort of a universal hinting instrument rather than a synthesis of the other instruments, because the tempi can be slower because of the decay, but does it make that the piece meaning is as good when it's stretched compared to what it used to be heard? But then it's not the same ears, it's not the same psyches, it's not the same time periods, it's not the way of learning. There was no unified or agreed publications with incredible importance on authenticity. It was all about people copying on their own to learn the piece before they could copy and purchase parts or scores. And then little by little, our awareness of the past has grown, but our aesthetic in classical music stylistic definition of right and wrong through publishers and recordings and artists, obviously not to mention teachers, and multiplication of schools, is amazing. It became in a way exponentially expanding the, let's say, 3 centuries between 16 and 19, early 20th, of classical tonal musics through the different styles that it carried, from Renaissance, Baroque, galant, classic, romantic, early modern, and then of course neoclassic, neo-romantic, or neo-modern. Of course, neo-modern didn't exist, but it was atonal and then serial and then quarter tonal and then perhaps back to tonal, but with different customizations of the tonality. Franck et Fauré et Debussy, they Brahms, they don't change the tonality or don't reject the tonality or don't reinvent another system or style of order of notes. They don't reinvent the alphabet, but they customize it. So you recognize a Brahms symphony from a Tchaikovsky symphony, a Beethoven or a Haydn symphony, because of the styles, while they use the same language. But because the music of the past was the music of their present, and a lot of the innuendos about the interpretation of it, which was not a concept that existed. People gathered to read music, not to play, let less to rehearse in order to play. Again, that is a development of societal ways of distilling music when it wasn't recorded, and after that now it's everywhere all the time, at will, conserved in digital formats, not even anymore physical records. So yes, we have this capacity to play the music of the past, which was its own present, out of context with our understanding of what are the customs of their playing. But we assume it when they write grace note, and we say, yes, half of the value, so, or can I say? I can say there must be a reason for which they didn't write 4/8 notes, because when they do, they do. And if they did 2 grace notes and 2/8 notes, perhaps it was mildly uneven or really tightly. Then of course that creates a character change because it becomes cute. Second theme of Beethoven's Sonata in D major. Or just... So we have to choose, we have to accept, we have to be wrong, we can be right for some, wrong for the eyes of others, rubato not, yes. All these undefined, outside of context of time, and unnotated for most of the time, especially the rubato, except the harmonic tempo compared to the melodic tempo, but then the pedal and then the smearing. So who has the good taste, who has the bad taste, according to which school, teaching, tradition? It becomes... of course, erudites know more, and in a way, ignorance was bliss. You played just as you felt. You didn't care if it was authentic, wrong, or right. Instrumental, tempo, acoustic, decorations, or ornamentations, or graces, as they used to call them, embellishments. But there's something universal beyond all these toolboxes of their own times that we revisit them, is that the melodic line, the tension release, the beauty of the expression is really the reflection of human experience and uplifting spiritually as well. So that even if you consider as a harpsichordist that pianists perhaps are betrayers of their repertoire that they play for the harpsichord, written on the harpsichord, I think that there is a universality that is obviously different because of the instrument, because then the tempo, articulation, phrasing, hearing, expectation changes. But you find its new coherence or temporary coherence of its time. I don't believe in traitors and purists. I think it's marvelous when you bathe in the aesthetics of the time through the instruments of the time with originals or copies of them, because then you enter in the steps of the past, and it's fascinating. It's museum comes alive, so to say, very schematically. But when you play it on a different instrument, you can enhance it, dilute it, or spell it in ways that you couldn't, because in a way the instrument of the past dictated you for the repertoire for which it was written, or through which it was expressed. Even if you can say the composer had a universal appeal, which it does, since we play them today on an instrument which doesn't correspond, because it means to us, we have an identification with the storytelling of the narrative quality of the universal message that is carried through the innuendos of the piece. So do we play it by commenting it? Do we just play it by for what it is? Do we think that we are betraying it because we don't play it it's supposed to be? Those questions ultimately, I think, matter less than the evidence of the honest, in that sense, personally involved interpretation with your conviction, regardless of all the other situations, because then people who listen or discover the piece through you, they connect to you because you're so charismatically in total merging situation with the character that you play. Like the actor, you forget the actor is acting because you only see the character come alive through the actor. And of course you can change it, the way you act it, or the way you pace it, or the way you space it, and the way you say it, and the way you innuendo it, and then evolve, and it becomes a beautiful, lifelong, in fact, trip. And the pieces are such a good companions of the music path of life, soundtrack of one's life. Thank you.